In the kingdom of Israel, where anointed kings rose and fell under the weight of destiny, there came a story unlike any other, a tale of two chosen men, one crowned by the will of the people and the other chosen by the will of God. It is the story of Saul, the mighty warrior king whose pride became his prison, and David, the shepherd boy whose harp could calm storms but whose calling would awaken a king's rage. Between them lay a battlefield not only of swords, but of hearts, thrones, and obedience. Prophecies whispered of their paths long before they met. One would fight to keep what he had, the other would wait for what was promised. One would fall by his own sword, the other would rise by the hand of grace. This is not just a story of men, it is a mirror of the human soul, of fear and faith, of envy and endurance, of how even kings tremble when destiny knocks at their gates. Tonight, travel back to the dusty hills of Israel. Hear the clash of iron, the cry of prophets, the trembling of crowns. Because when Saul faced David, jealousy fought destiny, and destiny did not lose. In the kingdom of Israel, long before the clash of kings, there was silence, a silence that carried the weight of waiting. The people had cried for a ruler, a man to stand before them in battle, a symbol to rally their fractured tribes. And though the God of their fathers had led them by prophets and judges, the people desired something tangible, a crown, a throne, a man they could see. And so, under the watchful eyes of heaven, the Lord gave them Saul, tall, broad-shouldered, and striking, the kind of man whose presence commanded attention. His armor gleamed like the dawn, and his voice could stir even the faint-hearted. The tribes of Israel looked at him and said, "Surely this is the one who will lead us." But destiny does not always shine as brightly as it begins. In the quiet village of Gibeah, Saul's story opened with humility. He was a man searching for lost donkeys when he stumbled into prophecy. A journey meant for beasts became the pathway to a crown. Samuel, the old prophet of Israel, met him beneath the sun and poured oil upon his head. The oil flowed down Saul's brow like liquid fire, a sign that heaven had chosen him. "You shall reign over the people of the Lord," said Samuel, "and you shall save them from the hand of their enemies." Those words were meant to strengthen him. But prophecy is a double-edged sword. It blesses and it burdens. At first, Saul hid among the baggage when the people called for their king. His heart was not yet hardened. It trembled under the weight of divine responsibility. Yet when the Spirit of the Lord came upon him, something changed. His timidity burned away, replaced by boldness that roared like thunder. He led Israel to victory against the Ammonites. The people rejoiced. The name of Saul became like music upon their tongues. He had begun well. The crown fit perfectly, and even heaven smiled for a time. But beneath that crown, pride was waiting. Pride, the silent thief that steals from destiny. Years later, the voice of Samuel would tremble with disappointment when he said, "You have done foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God. Now your kingdom shall not continue." Those words echoed like thunder in Saul's mind, but by then, another story had already begun. Quietly, humbly, in the fields of Bethlehem. There, far from the palace walls, a shepherd boy sang to the sheep under starlit skies. His name was David, the youngest of 8 sons, overlooked even by his father when the prophet came looking for a king. Samuel had gone to the house of Jesse with a horn of oil and a command from God. "I have chosen a king among his sons." One by one, Jesse's older sons stood tall before the prophet. They were warriors, strong, skilled, and confident. Each time Samuel looked upon one, he thought, "Surely this is the Lord's anointed." But the Lord whispered, "No." At last Samuel asked, "Are these all your sons?" And Jesse hesitated. "There remains yet the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep." "Send for him," said Samuel, "for we will not sit down until he comes." The boy arrived, sunburned, eyes bright, hands rough from labor, his clothes smelling of grass and earth. He was not tall like Saul, nor did he bear the air of a warrior. But when Samuel saw him, the Spirit of God stirred. "Arise, anoint him," said the Lord, "for this is he." The oil poured down David's head, and the wind seemed to shift. Heaven had spoken again, but this time it was not for the people's choice, it was for God's heart. From that moment, the Spirit of the Lord came upon David powerfully. The same Spirit that had once rested on Saul began to depart from him. A shadow began to creep over the king, a torment that no sword could fight. Saul grew restless. His dreams were haunted by the echo of lost favor. The prophet who once guided him now refused to return. Silence had replaced guidance, and the voice of God seemed distant. And so it was whispered in the palace, "A distressing spirit troubles the king. Let us find someone who can play skillfully upon the harp, that when the music sounds, the evil may flee." And in the providence of heaven, a servant spoke up, "I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who is skillful in playing, a mighty man of valor, a prudent man in speech, and the Lord is with him." So they sent for David. He came into the royal court carrying his harp. The same hands that once guided sheep now touched strings that carried peace. When he played, the darkness lifted from Saul, and the king's troubled soul found rest. For a while, the harmony between them was pure. The boy and the king, the harp and the crown, the servant and the master. But harmony has a fragile life when jealousy is near. David's presence became Saul's comfort, but it was also the mirror that showed him what he was losing. For every note of David's harp whispered of divine favor. Every melody carried a reminder, "The spirit that left you has found another." Then came the day of battle, the day that would change everything. The armies of Israel stood trembling before a giant named Goliath, champion of the Philistines. For 40 days he taunted the soldiers, his laughter echoing through the valley. "Choose a man for yourselves," he shouted, "and let him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail, then you shall be ours." No one moved, not even Saul, the man who once led Israel in courage. But somewhere in Bethlehem, a young shepherd was sent with bread and cheese to his brothers on the battlefield, and destiny walked with him. David arrived to find fear ruling the camp. He heard the taunts of the giant and saw the trembling of men. His spirit burned within him. Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? They laughed. "You are but a boy. Go back to your sheep." But David's confidence was not born of pride. It was born of experience, of nights spent facing lions and bears with nothing but a sling and faith. He had seen what God could do in secret, and now he would see what God could do in public. Word reached Saul, and the boy was brought before the king. Saul looked at him and said, "You are not able to fight this Philistine, for you are but a youth." David replied, "The Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will deliver me from this Philistine." There was something in his voice, a fire Saul once had. Perhaps for a fleeting moment, the king remembered what it felt like to believe. He gave David his armor, but it was too heavy, too unfamiliar. David took it off. "I cannot go in these," he said. "I have not tested them." So he went with what he knew, a sling, 5 smooth stones, and faith. The valley fell silent as the boy faced the giant. Goliath laughed. "Am I a dog that you come to me with sticks?" But David said, "You come to me with a sword, a spear, and a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts." The stone flew, the giant fell, and the earth trembled with the sound of destiny fulfilled. When David lifted Goliath's sword and cut off his head, Israel roared. The army that had trembled now surged in victory. Saul watched from afar, his eyes fixed on the boy whose courage had revived a nation. And as the people chanted in celebration, "Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Something cracked within the king's heart. The cheers that once belonged to him now belonged to another. The applause that once strengthened him now wounded him. The same boy whose harp brought him peace now became the reason for his unrest. That day jealousy was born in Saul's heart, and once it entered, it never left. The victory over Goliath echoed through Israel like thunder rolling across distant hills. David's name spread faster than wind, sung by children in the streets and whispered by soldiers around the fire. His triumph had become the people's hope, and Saul, the king who once stood taller than all men, now stood in the shadow of a shepherd. At first, Saul tried to hide his unease. He smiled when the people praised David. He even brought the boy close, making him a commander in his army. David's presence brought success, and Saul's armies rejoiced. Everywhere David went, the Lord gave him victory. But the cheers of the people began to sting. Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s, they sang. It was a harmless song to some, but to Saul, it was poison. Every verse stripped a layer from his pride. Every cheer felt like a crown slipping from his head. That night, the king could not sleep. His room, once filled with peace, now felt heavy with unseen eyes, his thoughts twisted like vines, binding his heart with envy. 10,000s, he muttered. They credit him with 10,000s, and me with only thousands. What more can he have but the kingdom itself? The words burned. They were not just fear, they were prophecy. For Saul knew, deep down, that what he had once lost could never return. The spirit that had anointed him now rested on David. And though David never sought Saul's throne, the throne had already begun to seek him. The next day, David played his harp as he had always done, the melody rising softly to calm the king's troubled spirit. The room glowed in the golden light of late afternoon, the air still, but Saul's heart was restless. His hand gripped the spear beside his throne. His eyes darkened with thoughts he could not silence, and suddenly, jealousy moved his arm. He hurled the spear with all the strength that once conquered armies. The weapon sliced through the air toward David, a streak of rage wrapped in metal. David turned just in time. The spear struck the wall beside him and quivered there, humming with fury. The boy's heart pounded, but he did not retaliate. He looked at the man who had once called him son and saw the torment in his eyes, a king at war with himself. Saul said nothing. David said nothing. The silence between them was heavier than the sound of the spear. From that day, Saul feared David, for he saw that the Lord was with him and had departed from himself. David withdrew, his spirit wounded, but his faith unbroken. He continued to serve Saul faithfully, leading the army with wisdom and valor. Yet the more success he found, the more Saul's envy burned. So the king began to plot. He offered his daughter Merab to David as a wife, saying, "Only be valiant for me and fight the Lord's battles." But the promise was a snare meant to destroy him. David, humble as ever, replied, "Who am I, and what is my life, that I should be son-in-law to the king?" When the time came, Saul gave Merab to another. Still, David did not protest. His humility only deepened Saul's resentment. Then Saul's other daughter, Michal, loved David, and when Saul heard of it, he smiled, not with joy, but with cunning. "I will give her to him," he said, "that she may be a snare to him, and the hand of the Philistines may be against him." He demanded a bride price, 100 foreskins of the Philistines, expecting David to die in battle. But David returned alive, and with double the number required. Saul's plans failed again. His jealousy grew into terror. The Lord's hand was unmistakable upon the young man. The crown Saul wore was already trembling in its place, and from that day forward, Saul became David's enemy continually. He spoke to his son Jonathan and to all his servants, commanding them to kill David. But Jonathan loved David as his own soul. In Jonathan's heart, loyalty to his father battled with the purity of his friendship. He could not betray the one whom heaven had clearly chosen. He went to David secretly and said, "My father seeks to kill you. Therefore take heed until morning and hide yourself." Jonathan reasoned with his father, pleading for David's life. "Let not the king sin against his servant," he said, "for he has not sinned against you, and his works have been very good toward you." For a moment Saul softened. "As the Lord lives, he shall not be killed." But peace never lasts long when envy rules the heart. Soon after, war broke out again. David led Israel to another great victory, and the songs began once more. The women danced in the streets, their voices rising like incense. "David! David!" Saul's eyes darkened. The peace in his soul vanished, and once again, as David played the harp, the spear flew. This time David fled and did not return. He ran through the corridors of the palace, through the courtyards and shadows, leaving behind the only life he had known. The man he had once served now sought his blood. Michal, his wife, warned him. She let him down through a window in the night and placed an image in the bed, covering it with goat's hair to deceive the pursuers. By morning, David was gone. He fled to Samuel in Ramah, seeking refuge in the prophet's dwelling. There, he poured out his grief, not against Saul, but before God. "How does one serve a king who seeks his life?" he asked. "How does one love a man who once loved him, but now desires his death?" Samuel said little. He only watched the young man with eyes that had seen too many kings fall and too many anointings misunderstood. "David," he said quietly, "the path of the anointed is never easy. You were chosen not to destroy Saul, but to outlast him. Keep your hands clean and your heart pure. The throne that is yours will not come by rebellion, but by endurance." David bowed his head. He understood, though it hurt deeply. But Saul's rage was not finished. He sent messengers to capture David at Ramah, but each group that came fell under the power of prophecy, unable to harm him. Finally, Saul himself went, and before he could reach David, the Spirit of God overcame him too. The king fell to the ground, stripped of his royal robe, prophesying through the night. And so it was said, almost in irony, "Is Saul also among the prophets?" For a brief, fleeting moment, heaven restrained his madness, but when the sun rose, jealousy returned with the morning light. David fled again, from Samuel's sanctuary to the wilderness, from friend to stranger, from royal favor to hunted prey. In one night the palace became a prison he could never return to. Far away, in the silence of dawn, David hid in a cave. His breath trembled as the sound of Saul's men echoed in the distance. Around him, the rocks glowed faintly in the amber light of dawn, cold, sharp, unwelcoming. He was no longer the boy who sang to sheep or played for the king. He was now a fugitive, the anointed outlaw of Israel. He looked up toward heaven and whispered, "Lord, if this is the path of the anointed, then give me the strength to walk it." The wind answered with silence, but in that silence God was working. The wilderness became David's new kingdom, not of gold, but of dust, not of walls, but of caves, and not of noblemen, but of outcasts, broken souls whom the world had forgotten. When word spread that David had fled, men who were distressed, in debt, or discontented gathered to him. They came from all corners, fugitives, dreamers, warriors with haunted eyes. 400 men in all. They came not because he had a throne, but because he had something greater, purpose. In the dim light of Adullam's cave, their torches flickered against stone walls. David stood before them, not as a prince, but as a brother in suffering. His voice was steady, though his heart still bled from betrayal. "Men," he said, "we may be hunted, but we are not forsaken. The Lord who anointed me will not abandon us in these shadows. We will not be ruled by revenge, but by righteousness. We will wait upon the Lord." They listened, not because his crown glittered, but because his faith did. And so the cave became a cradle of kingship, a place where destiny hid from death until the appointed time. Meanwhile, in Gibeah's palace, Saul's spirit darkened further. His throne no longer felt like a gift, but a cage. The echoes of David's name haunted him, even in silence. At every banquet, every victory, every quiet hour of night, he saw David's face, calm and unbroken. He called his servants, "Find him, bring him to me. That son of Jesse shall not live." Jonathan heard these words and went pale. Once more he sought David in secret. The two friends met in the wilderness, their eyes heavy with sorrow. Jonathan said, "My father will not rest until you are gone, but do not fear. The Lord will make you king over Israel, and I shall be next to you." David's heart broke at those words. He knew Jonathan's loyalty ran deeper than blood, deeper than crowns. They clasped hands beneath the fading light and swore again their covenant of friendship. Then they parted, one to the palace, the other to the wilderness. As the days passed, Saul's pursuit grew fierce. He sent men to every city and hill, hunting the one who had once played for his peace. But David had learned to move like the wind, invisible, yet always near. At last it happened, the moment that would test every fiber of David's heart. Saul entered a cave at En-Gedi, unaware that David and his men were hiding deep within its shadows. The king came alone, weary from the chase, his armor laid aside. The flicker of his torch cast trembling gold upon the walls. David's men saw him and whispered, "This is the day the Lord spoke of. Behold, he has delivered your enemy into your hand. Strike him now." David's heart pounded. The man who had thrown spears at him, the king who had hunted him across deserts, was now within reach, vulnerable, unguarded. One strike, and it would be over. The crown could be his without battle, but David's spirit trembled, not with fear, but with reverence. He crept forward in the dark and cut off a corner of Saul's robe. Then he withdrew into the shadows. Even that small act struck his conscience. "The Lord forbid," David whispered, "that I should do this thing to my master, the Lord's anointed." When Saul left the cave, David followed him out. The wind carried his voice across the valley. "My lord the king." Saul turned, startled. There stood David, holding the torn piece of his robe. "See, my father," David called, "the corner of your robe in my hand. I could have killed you, but I did not. I will not raise my hand against you, for you are the Lord's anointed. Why do you listen to men who say that I seek your harm? The Lord judge between you and me, but my hand shall not be against you." The king's face twisted, confusion, shame, awe. For the first time in years, Saul's heart broke through the fog of jealousy. "Is that your voice, my son David?" he cried, his voice trembling. "You are more righteous than I. You have repaid me good, whereas I have repaid you evil. May the Lord reward you for what you have done this day." And Saul wept. He lifted his hand toward heaven. "I know that you shall surely be king, and that the kingdom of Israel shall be established in your hand. Swear now to me that you will not cut off my descendants." David nodded. "I swear." The moment was holy, like light piercing a storm, but peace born of guilt does not last. Though Saul returned home, the shadow of jealousy followed him. His remorse faded with time, and the fear of losing power returned stronger than before. David continued wandering, from stronghold to stronghold, from mountain to wilderness. His life became a journey of hiding and trusting. Each night he lay upon the ground and looked up at the stars, whispering, "Lord, teach me patience. Let me not take by force what you have promised in time." And God heard. One night, as his men slept, David took up his harp. The wind moved through the trees, carrying his melody across the hills. It was not a song of triumph, but of surrender. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear? The Lord is the strength of my life. Of whom shall I be afraid? Though an army encamp against me, my heart shall not fear. For in the day of trouble, he shall hide me in his pavilion." Those words would later become Psalm 27, born not in peace, but in pursuit. Meanwhile, Saul's kingdom weakened. The prophets were silent, the victories less frequent. Even his own soldiers began to murmur of David's righteousness. The people's hearts leaned toward the shepherd, not the king. And then came another night of testing. Saul again marched to seek David, camping near Hachilah Hill. When David heard it, he took one of his men, Abishai, and crept into Saul's camp under cover of darkness. There lay the king, asleep, his spear stuck in the ground beside his head. Around him, his guards slept soundly, overcome by a divine slumber. Abishai whispered, "God has delivered your enemy into your hand again. Let me strike him now with a spear to the earth. I will not strike twice." David shook his head. "Do not destroy him. Who can stretch out his hand against the Lord's anointed and be guiltless? As the Lord lives, the Lord himself shall strike him, or his day shall come to die, but I will not." He took the spear and the jug of water from beside Saul's head and left the camp quietly. When he reached a safe distance, David called out from the hilltop, waking the army below. "Abner, are you not a man? Why have you not kept watch over your lord the king? Look, where is the king's spear and the jug of water that were by his head?" Saul stirred from sleep and recognized the voice. "Is this your voice, my son David?" David answered, "Yes, my lord the king. Why does my lord pursue his servant? What evil have I done? Let the Lord deliver me from your hand." Once again, Saul's heart melted. "I have sinned," he said. "Return my son David, for I will harm you no more." But David knew better. Words are fleeting when the heart is divided. He bowed, turned away, and walked into the wilderness once more. The years rolled on like weary rivers. David aged in hardship, but his wisdom deepened. He learned that true kingship was not won by seizing the throne. It was forged in the waiting. He had been hunted, betrayed, and broken, yet never defeated. The crown was still in Saul's palace, but heaven had already moved it. The years had not been kind to Saul. The crown that once gleamed like promise now hung heavy with regret. His beard had grown gray, his eyes weary, his heart hollowed by guilt and madness. He had fought so hard to keep what heaven had already removed. The silence of God had become unbearable. Once, prophets had spoken to him. Once, dreams had guided him. Once, Samuel's voice had been his anchor in the storm. But now, every night brought only silence, vast, unrelenting silence. The Philistines were gathering again, stronger than before. Their armies stretched like a dark sea across the plains of Shunem, and Saul, trembling upon the hills of Gilboa, looked out at their countless tents. Fear, cold and unfamiliar, crept into his bones. He sought the Lord, but no answer came, no dream, no prophet, no voice. It was as though heaven itself had turned away. And so, in desperation, Saul turned where no king of Israel should ever turn, to the shadows. "Find me a woman who has a familiar spirit," he whispered to his servants, "that I may inquire of her." They hesitated. "My lord, you have banished the mediums and spiritists from the land." Saul's voice hardened. "Find me one." That night, cloaked in darkness, the king disguised himself, trading his royal robe for common garments. Accompanied by 2 men, he descended into Endor, where whispers spoke of a woman who could summon the dead. The night was thick with wind and sand. A single torch flickered before a small hut at the edge of the valley. The woman, old and weary-eyed, looked up as he entered. "Bring up for me whom I shall name to you," Saul said, his voice hoarse with desperation. She studied him, suspicious. "Surely you know what Saul has done. He has cut off the mediums from the land. Why do you lay a snare for my life?" But the king swore to her by the Lord, the very Lord he could no longer hear. "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." "Whom shall I bring up for you?" she asked. "Bring up Samuel," he said. The name itself trembled in the air. The woman began her ritual, strange, ancient words muttered in the dark. But suddenly, she screamed. Her eyes widened with terror. "Why have you deceived me? You are Saul." Saul fell to his knees, trembling. "What do you see?" "I see a spirit ascending out of the earth." An old man covered with a mantle. Saul bowed his face to the ground. "It is Samuel." And then silence turned to voice. The prophet spoke, not with the warmth of comfort, but the chill of judgment. "Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up?" Saul's voice cracked. "I am in great distress. The Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me. He answers me no more, neither by prophets nor by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may tell me what to do." Samuel's spirit looked upon him with sorrow. "Why then do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you and become your enemy? The Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand and given it to David, the son of Jesse, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord. Tomorrow you and your sons shall be with me. The Lord will deliver Israel into the hand of the Philistines." The words struck like lightning. Saul fell full length upon the ground, trembling with terror. His strength left him completely. The woman, seeing his anguish, begged him to eat, but he refused. Only after much pleading did he take a piece of bread. Then, before dawn, he rose and stumbled out into the darkness, a king condemned, walking into the night that would not end. Meanwhile, far away in the wilderness of Ziklag, David too faced his own trial. Though he had spared Saul, his loyalty had not spared him from hardship. To survive, David had taken refuge among the Philistines, the very enemies of Israel. For 16 months he lived in their land under the favor of Achish, king of Gath. It was a strange irony. The giant slayer now sheltered by the people he once conquered, David used wisdom to walk the narrow path between survival and faith. To Achish, he appeared as a loyal servant, but secretly, David struck the enemies of Israel in other lands, leaving none alive to report his deeds. Then came the day when Achish said, "You shall go out with me to battle against Israel." David's heart froze. The battle lines of destiny were being drawn, Saul on one side, David on the other. But God intervened. The Philistine lords distrusted David. "Send him back," they demanded, "lest in the battle he turn against us." So David returned to Ziklag, only to find it burned, its houses destroyed, its women and children taken captive by the Amalekites. The men who followed him wept until they had no strength left to weep. Their grief turned to rage, and they spoke of stoning him. David fell to his knees and did what Saul had forgotten how to do. He inquired of the Lord, "Shall I pursue this troop? Shall I overtake them?" And the Lord answered, "Pursue, for you shall surely overtake them and recover all." Faith replaced despair. David gathered his weary men and chased the enemy across the desert. At the brook Besor, some were too exhausted to continue, but David pressed on with those who could. They found an abandoned Egyptian servant who revealed where the Amalekites were feasting. By night, David attacked. Swift, fierce, unstoppable, the battle raged till dawn, and when the dust settled, every captive was recovered, wives, children, livestock, all unharmed. The men wept again, but this time with joy. David gave glory to God and shared the spoils generously, even with those who had stayed behind. "The Lord has preserved us," he said. "Let none be left out of his blessing." His leadership shone brighter than ever, not from a throne, but from mercy. While Saul was losing his crown, David was being crowned in spirit. The next morning, the Philistines advanced against Israel at Mount Gilboa. The day was heavy with foreboding. Clouds covered the sun. On one side stood Saul, armored in desperation. On the other, David, unaware of the tragedy about to unfold. The Philistines struck hard. Israel fled before them. Arrows rained down like judgment. Saul's sons, Jonathan, Abinadab, and Malchishua, fell one by one upon the slopes. When Saul saw that the battle was lost, his heart shattered. The archers hit him. Wounded and bleeding, he stumbled. His armor-bearer trembled beside him. Saul said, "Draw your sword and thrust me through with it, lest these uncircumcised men come and abuse me." But the armor-bearer could not. He was too afraid. So Saul took his own sword, fell upon it, and the first king of Israel died upon his own blade. The man who had once stood taller than all now lay low in the dust. His armor-bearer followed him in death. The army scattered. The crown rolled down the hill and came to rest in silence. When the Philistines returned to the field the next day, they found Saul and his sons dead. They cut off his head and hung his body upon the wall of Beth-shan. But when the men of Jabesh-Gilead heard of it, they rose by night, crossed the valley, and took the bodies down. They buried Saul and his sons beneath a tamarisk tree, fasting 7 days and mourning. Thus ended the reign of Israel's first king, not by the sword of an enemy, but by the weight of his own disobedience. And somewhere, far from Gilboa, a messenger ran breathless into David's camp, bringing the news. He fell to the ground and cried, "Saul and Jonathan are dead upon the mountains of Gilboa." David froze. His breath caught. The words struck like thunder. "Saul and Jonathan?" He tore his clothes. The men around him did the same. They wept until their strength was gone. Then David lifted his voice and sang, "The beauty of Israel is slain upon your high places. How the mighty have fallen. Saul and Jonathan were beloved and pleasant in their lives, and in their death they were not divided. They were swifter than eagles, stronger than lions. You daughters of Israel, weep over Saul." His song was not one of triumph, it was one of grief. Though Saul had hunted him, David remembered the man he once was, chosen, anointed, valiant, And in that moment, David proved why God had chosen him, because his heart could love even those who had wronged him. The wind over Gilboa carried sorrow. A kingdom had fallen, a family was gone, and the echoes of Saul's final breath lingered over Israel like smoke after a fire. Far away, in Ziklag, David sat in silence. Around him, his men mourned in muted voices, but his heart was lost in thought, not of victory, but of loss. He remembered the first time he saw Saul, tall, radiant, anointed by Samuel's hand, chosen by God himself. He remembered the early days of service, the music that once soothed the king's tormented soul. He remembered laughter, feasts, battlefields, and friendship with Jonathan, his brother in spirit. And he remembered the spears, the nights of flight, the caves, the tears whispered into the wilderness, the years of waiting. And now, it was over. Saul was gone. Jonathan was gone. The chapter that had shaped him through suffering had finally closed. Yet David wept, not because his enemy was dead, but because his heart still carried compassion. Even when Saul tried to destroy him, David never hated him. He understood what many kings would never learn, that the anointed of God must never strike the anointed of God. When the Amalekite messenger came with Saul's crown and bracelet, claiming he had ended the king's life, David tore his garments in grief. He looked at the man and said, "How is it you were not afraid to stretch forth your hand to destroy the Lord's anointed?" Then he commanded that the man be executed. It was not vengeance, it was reverence, a declaration that even in death, Saul was still God's chosen servant. Days later, David prayed. He asked the Lord, "Shall I go up to any of the cities of Judah?" And the Lord said, "Go up." So David went to Hebron with his wives, his men, and their families. There, the elders of Judah came to him and anointed him king. The oil ran down his face again, not in the field, not in secret, but before the people. The promise spoken years ago had come full circle. But David's heart trembled with humility. He knew that every drop of oil carried the memory of Saul, of what happens when a man loses his way before God. He knelt before the altar and whispered, "Lord, you gave me a kingdom, but may I never forget it is yours first." The room fell silent. Even the torches seemed to burn softer. The early days of David's reign were not peaceful. The nation was divided. Saul's general, Abner, raised Saul's son Ish-bosheth to rule over the northern tribes. The house of Saul and the house of David were locked in a long war. But David grew stronger, not by cruelty, but by patience. He ruled with justice, sought God's counsel before battle, and honored every covenant he made. When Abner finally came seeking peace, David welcomed him. But before reconciliation could take root, Joab, David's commander, struck Abner in revenge for past bloodshed. David wept again. He walked before Abner's coffin barefoot, mourning as if for a brother. "Do you not know," he cried, "that a prince and a great man has fallen this day in Israel?" His grief was not weakness, it was wisdom. David understood that a throne built on bitterness cannot stand. When Ish-bosheth was later slain by his own men, they brought his head to David, thinking they had done him a favor. But the king looked upon them with sorrow and said, "Wicked men have slain a righteous person in his own house upon his bed. Shall I not now require his blood of your hand?" And he commanded their death. Then the elders of all Israel came to David at Hebron. They said, "Behold, we are your bone and your flesh. The Lord said to you, 'You shall shepherd my people Israel and be ruler over them.'" And there at last David was anointed king over all Israel. The trumpet sounded across the valleys, the people rejoiced, and the golden age of Israel began. David walked upon the balcony of his new palace, overlooking Jerusalem, the city that would bear his name for generations. The crown upon his head shimmered in the sunlight, but his gaze was not upon the crown. It was upon the sky, upon the God who had led him through darkness into destiny. He whispered, "It was never my battle, Lord. You fought for me when I was silent. You lifted me when I was hunted. You kept my hands from blood, and you crowned me with mercy." The wind carried his prayer into the horizon. Below, the people sang songs of praise. But in his heart, David sang another, a quiet hymn only heaven could hear. He raised me from the miry clay and set my feet upon a rock. He put a new song in my mouth. Praise to our God. Many shall see it and fear and trust in the Lord. It was Psalm 40, born not from ease but endurance. And though the years would later bring David his own failures, he never forgot Saul, the king who had taught him what power without obedience becomes. He honored Saul's memory as long as he lived. He sought out Jonathan's son, Mephibosheth, and restored his inheritance, saying, "For the sake of your father, you shall eat at my table always." In that act of grace, David closed the circle. The house of Saul and the house of David, once divided by jealousy, were joined again by love. The sun set over Jerusalem, its light glowing amber across the stone walls. David stood alone at the palace window, watching the horizon fade. He thought of Samuel, the prophet who had anointed both kings. He thought of Saul, the man who once burned with promise and fell beneath his own pride. He thought of Jonathan, his brother, his covenant friend, whose loyalty never broke. And he whispered into the fading light, "I did not take his place. I carried his lessons." Then he bowed his head, the golden crown glinting like fire in the dusk, and said, "May I never forget, the throne is nothing without the Lord who gives it." The story of Saul and David is not a story of enemies. It is the story of what happens when two men are chosen by the same God, but only one chooses to surrender completely. Saul showed us how jealousy can destroy destiny. David showed us how mercy can protect it. And together, their story became the eternal lesson of kingship, humility, and grace. That favor without faith becomes downfall. But waiting on God, even in the wilderness, leads to everlasting glory. Because when jealousy fought destiny, destiny did not lose.